Thanks for listening to this audio podcast from Crossgate Church in Hot Springs, Arkansas. We invite you to visit us at crossgate.org. It is our hope that you will hear from God and draw closer to Him through this service.
So today we are hitting pause on our Ephesians teaching series. We have been in a teaching series in Ephesians for the last several weeks, and we will resume that teaching series next Sunday. But today, as we do every year on Memorial Day weekend, we're going to revisit a theme that is incredibly important for you and for me. And that theme is that freedom isn't free. Amen? Freedom isn't free. As Americans, our freedom isn't free. As Jesus followers, our freedom isn't free. A price has been paid. And it is important that we remind ourselves today that a price has been paid for our freedom. And that price was blood. Listen to John chapter 12, verse 24. Jesus said, "Truly, truly I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls unto the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." The ironic paradox is this: death, as sad and as tragic and as miserable as it is, sometimes brings life. Now that's true nationally, and it is true spiritually. So as we talk, and we do this every year, if you've been around a Crossgate Church for the last several years, we've done this pretty much every year since I've been the pastor here. It's near and dear to my heart. I pray it's near and dear to yours as well. That when we say freedom isn't free, we're talking along two lines. We're talking about the fact that national freedom isn't free, and we're talking about the fact that spiritual freedom isn't free. And so today we're going to talk along those two lines, and we're going to be reminded today of the price that was paid for our national freedom, but we're also going to be reminded in a very tangible way that the price has been paid for our spiritual freedom as well. So think with me for a moment about the fact that national freedom isn't free. Now this, of course, is Memorial Day weekend, as many of you know. Tomorrow is Memorial Day. Now it's always important for us as Americans to remember there is a difference between Veterans Day and Memorial Day, right? Veterans Day takes place in November. And Veterans Day is all about honoring and remembering everyone who has ever served in our military and our armed forces in the United States, whether past, present, future, whatever. Veterans Day is all about that broad group of folk who have served our nation. And that's an important day. Memorial Day, on the other hand, is a day where we have, quite frankly, no one to thank. Because Memorial Day is about those who have paid the last full measure of their devotion and have been killed in the service of our nation. That's why I say, national freedom is not free. It has been bought and paid for with the blood of patriots and heroes. But when we talk about Memorial Day, and this is where it really hits home, when we talk about Memorial Day tends to be somewhat nameless and faceless. Isn't that true? For many people, less than 1% of Americans serving in the military currently. And so for many people, Memorial Day tends to be nameless and faceless. We say, yes, let's remember our fallen. Let's remember that someone paid the price. But I will tell you, I would be derelict in my duty as a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ if I did not take steps to put a name and a face with Memorial Day every single year. And that's exactly what we've done. It's kind of a theme and variation in a sense. Every year we say freedom isn't free. And then what we do at Crossgate Church when we talk about national freedom is we always want to put some faces and some names to connect it with Memorial Day so that you know some of the stories of the people who have sacrificed everything for our national freedom. This year is no different. And this year we're going to recognize an Army Ranger, Sergeant First Class Christopher DeMay, who served with the 2nd Ranger Battalion for 10 years and was killed in action in Afghanistan in October of 2011. Christopher's mother is with us here today, and I'll take a moment to introduce her later, and I know you'll warmly welcome her to Crossgate Church, but his mother, Scotty, is with us today. Christopher was a tremendous American who served at as we say, the proverbial, the tip of the spear with the Army Rangers. So friends, this morning, as I said, we are going to put a face and a name with Memorial Day, as we should. Sergeant First Class Christopher DeMay. And I want you to give a very warm Crossgate welcome to his mother, Miss Scotty DeMay, right now. Scotty, come on up and join us, please. Thank you so much, church. Thank you. Please be seated. Well, Scotty, it is a joy to have you with us here today. And you've come all the way from Colorado Springs to be with us. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here at Crossgate Church. Well, so tell us a little bit about yourself and just tell us about your relationship with Jesus.
My mother had been raised Methodist and had gone to the Methodist church all her life. And Daddy was raised in a violent alcoholic's home. And so he did not know anything about the Lord. But he felt a call to the ministry. But Daddy was so theologically ignorant. He was so they lived in Mississippi at the time. He was pretty sure that God didn't live in Indiana, so he ups and moves us to Indiana, only to discover God does live there. And he finally accepted the call. And I remember my mother telling me about when she hated her mother. And I will say my grandmother was a challenging woman. I loved her, but she was challenging. And that when she got saved, she was filled with love for her mother. And so I grew up in a home where my parents talked about how Christ changed their lives. But being a preacher's kid, and I was very perceptive, there were some things I noticed growing up in the church. There was kind of a disconnect at times. And I would always say to my mom, I don't understand, Mom, that they accepted Christ, but why do they live the way they did? And she just basically said, well, honey, they wanted the fire insurance, but they didn't want the discipleship. So I remember in fourth grade, I remember where I was sitting, and I'm looking around at all the kids in my class, the third and fourth grade were together, and I just remember thinking, God has something special for my life. And I think that was one thing I really appreciated about my parents. They really focused on calling, purpose, and mission in life. And I always loved when the missionaries came. That was really just something very heartwarming to me. So in high school, I was involved in Youth for Christ, and my friends were Nazarenes and Pentecostals and Baptists, and I was Methodist and Quakers. And we had quite interesting theological discussions from our own viewpoints. But I went to a Bible college that my dad had gone to, and it was extremely legalistic. It was a very negative experience for me. And in my I was there 3 semesters, but the last semester I was so depressed, my grades went down. And I actually had canker sores all in my mouth. It was so stressful for me. So I went home, and I thought, God, when I was in my early teens, I felt he had called me to the secular media. And of course, everybody said, oh, that's of the devil. And I thought, well, if it was of the devil, why do I feel like God called me to that? But I went home and I prayed. I said, God, I don't know. Where do you want me? I thought I was called, and it sure didn't work for me at the Bible college. And I had my dad's song leader's son went to Oral Roberts University, so I ordered the catalog. I open it up, and it falls open to communications, radio, TV, and film. And I just thought, oh, I know God wants me to go there. But they'd already been in class for 2 weeks. So I called the registrar, and he allowed me to come on probation. And then my grades were great after that. But our professors were so godly that the whole purpose of our college education is so that we could go out with a passion for the Lord and share the Lord with others, no matter where we were. Then halfway through ORU, I joined a singing group called Living Sound. And we traveled, there were 25 of us that lived on a Greyhound bus for 3 years. You really get to know people. And I did the photography, the multimedia, and made all the entire girls' costumes. So it was very interesting traveling all over Canada, Scandinavia, Europe, and we were the first group into Poland. And we also we were invited by the Israeli government, and we lived in South Africa for a year, in Zimbabwe. But one of the things that was so interesting to me were some of the legalistic, you could cross a border, and like in Finland, mascara was a big sin, but you could wear a skirt very short. But in Sweden, it wasn't a sin, and it was kind of interesting to me, some of the rules that came out. Now, all these people that we stayed with, I felt like a lot of them were really godly people, but they were really tied up with some of the legalistic stuff. So I toured with them for 3 years and came back to ORU and got my degree in radio, TV, and film, and actually worked in the media while I was finishing college. So since that time, I've been in ministry my entire life. I worked in ministry, I volunteered in ministry, and I was always really involved in it.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you have been engaged with Jesus just really for decades, so just loving the Lord, serving as He has called you.
One of the things that happened to me in my 30s is my spiritual mom, who's Methodist, she was a trainer for Precept, Kay Arthur. And so she got me involved in Precept. And one of the things I so appreciate about it, it taught me the tool of how to study the Bible. And at that point in my life, I was just really hungry for knowing the Word for myself. And when Kay said, if you never ever heard a teacher or preacher the rest of your life, could you rightly divide the Word? And so I appreciated that training, but it was that training and going to the Word through all the difficult things I've experienced in my life that has kept me alive, actually, that and hymns.
Absolutely. So when Christopher is 17 years old, she had 2 boys, and Christopher comes to you when he's 17 years old, said, I want to join the Army. So how did that go down? And then he eventually ended up in the Rangers, so what was he doing there?
Well, he was living with his dad, and his dad was Canadian, so Christopher had dual citizenship. So he had asked his dad if he could join the military, because he didn't like school. And, his dad said no, so he calls me thinking he can work mom. And I told him, son, I really would prefer you go to college, get an education, and then if you want to serve, maybe. And so I told him what I would prefer that he do, and he says, I'm tired of studying. I'm tired of people telling me what to do. I'm tired of people telling me to clean my room. And I thought, oh, you want to join the Army? But I didn't say anything. So, and then I will tell you, God works miracles. So when he ends up in the Rangers, I'm just praying he'll go to church. Well, here was God's miracle. Christopher had the choice between cleaning the latrine with a toothbrush or going to church. He went to church. So anyway, I worked with first he was thinking of SEALs, and I was trying to talk him, go into the Air Force. They're special forces, they just go rescue people. But I felt the Air Force was safer because they shoot from a distance. So I worked with a SEAL, and the SEAL told me what it was like for SEAL training. So my son calls, I said, so how long can you hold your breath underwater? But he decided to join the Army Rangers, and the only thing I knew about the military was do not sign the contract unless it has everything you want. When I moved to Colorado Springs, the first party I went to, I thought 1530 was the address, and I couldn't find the place I was supposed to go to. So anyway, Christopher, so what I did tell Christopher that day, I said, when you turn 18, if you choose to join the Army, I will support you 3,000%. But what I didn't tell him was, but not in my heart. And so he did join, so when he went to sign up, the recruiter didn't put RIP in there, Ranger School. And Christopher says, well, I guess you've just wasted both of our time. And so I actually had taught my boys to negotiate at garage sales, and he did a very good job. So he got RIP in his contract before he signed.
So he was 10 years in the Rangers. He did 14 deployments. That's a lot of time overseas. He put a lot of work in, and he was also, just for our folks' knowledge, he was basically a fires coordinator NCO. In fact, by the time he had been in 10 years, he was the head sergeant for all fires coordination for the 2nd Ranger Battalion. And that's basically the guy that coordinates with all the attack aircraft on station, Air Force, Navy, Marines, whatever. I mean, just bringing all the ordnance on the bad guys.
Terry talk. So here's what my son did. He was on the ground, and he would give the coordinates to the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Kind of like when you see Israel points a missile that blows up a car with the bad guys. Well, that's what my son did. And had he lived, he was going to a regiment, and he would have been overtraining all the Rangers. He also wrote the first Ranger training manual, which I thought was really hilarious, because he was a good writer. He couldn't spell. So when they told me that he had written it, I said, who spell checked it?
So October 2011 comes. He's on his 14th deployment. Tell us what you know about the mission he was on when he was killed.
So actually, Christopher wasn't supposed to go, but the JTAC broke his leg, and Christopher had to go in his place. And he promised me he was going to be in the Star Wars room, and that was so not. And the mission that night was they were going to capture a Talibani Pakistani, because the Pashtuns, their tribal area is Afghanistan and Pakistan. He was an IED maker, and he was really good. Most of them aren't. He was like injuring 250 Afghanis a month, and I don't even know what the death toll was. So it was really important to take him out. So Christopher, went in, and he was standing at a bridge that went into and then you'd go into the compound. The guys who got to the first door looked in there and saw there was no rug and no Quran, and they knew it was booby-trapped. And so they yelled, I think avalanche was the word. And then someone tripped a daisy chain IED. And Christopher and Ashley White were just outside the perimeter of on the perimeter of the compound. They walked towards each other, and they said, "What was that?" And then they were both hit by an IED.
So meanwhile, you're back in the States, and you're at your house, and this is hours later, close to midnight, and you hear this.
So I'm watching them pull Gaddafi out of the cement thing, and I'm all happy, they got Gaddafi. And I hear, it's almost midnight, on my front door. And it just kept going. And so I was going to get my phone to call the police, because where I live, people knock on my door to use my phone when they have car trouble. But I'm single, and I'm not opening the door at midnight. But I couldn't walk past my front door because it's all glass. So I went and peeked out a bedroom, and I saw a uniform, and then I got mad. Why are the police here? I haven't done anything. Then it kept knocking. Then I looked again, and I recognized the uniforms. And so I walked down the stairs, and I opened the door, and I said, "Is my son dead?" And they said, "May we come in, ma'am?" So I'm walking up the stairs, and I said, "Is my son dead?" And they have this script that I actually found the booklet online of what they say to the family. So they, told me Christopher was dead, and I just said, "Does Sarah know, his wife?" And they said she was informed an hour ago. And then I asked for the coordinates, not knowing it had anything to do with his job, because I wanted to look up on Google to see ground where my son's lifeblood was sucked out. And, they couldn't. It was like national secret. And I would ask every general, what were the coordinates? Can I have the coordinates? I want the coordinates. And then I write for a military journal called Half a Journal. And there was a new guy that came in who was a ranger. And so we always, "Hey, welcome on board." And I said, "Oh, my son was Christopher Nome. Did you know him?" And he said, "Yes, I was there that night." Well, there's something in the military, they don't like you to know the details of how they died. So they give you, it's like a report, but it's all blacked out. So you really don't know what happened. They kind of leave the prepositions in place, and that's about it. So I had told the generals, I want to know what happened. And of course, the military doesn't believe in that. But my imagination was that just a little bit I knew, which wasn't much, was torturing me. So Shane did call me, and I really think he needed to, because he was suicidal. He needed to talk. And he told me everything, every dangling limb, how much blood. But you know what? It gave me peace. I did know, so when I went to Christopher's military funeral, I'd never been to a military funeral, the bottom part of the casket was closed. I thought, oh, that's weird, and there's a curtain. So, of course, I peeked behind it. He didn't have any legs from the knees down. It had blown him off. And so I talked to my doctor, "Why didn't my son live? I see double amputees." And he said, "Well, Scotty, that's usually surgery." But he told me that Christopher probably felt nothing, and that basically he bled out like a fire hose in minutes and died. So I know probably some people wouldn't want to know the details. I no longer was torturing myself with what happened and did my son suffer. And so it actually gave me peace.
So the notification team leaves. You had some other folks for a little bit, and then they left. And you told me that you went to bed, but God said something to you.
So they were there about an hour, and I have to tell you, they're telling me about my son being killed in Afghanistan. So he was killed, I was told on October 2nd that he was killed on October 21st. And that was so confusing to me in the beginning, because of the time change and everything, or the way the time is. And after about an hour, and I'm feeling horrible for them to have to give parents that kind of news, and they had 2 more stops that night. So I just said, "Hey, I've been a single parent, I've been to hell and back, you can leave now. I just wanted to be alone." They said, "We can't leave you, ma'am. You have to call somebody." So we called my best friend and her husband, who's my doctor, and they came over with me and wanted to take me home, and I just thought, no, I just want to crawl under the covers and never come out again, ever, and pull the covers over my head, and that's it. But I'm a host home provider, and I care for 2 disabled ladies. The next morning, I get Nikki up. She's in the shower, and I'm bathing her. And I thought, oh, this feels oddly comforting, because the only thing in my life that had not blown apart. I was so grateful that I had gotten actually into host home providing kind of by accident, but I knew it was God's provision for me, because most Gold Star parents lose their jobs. You can't think. Your mind is completely blown up. I get lost going to the grocery store in my own neighborhood. I can't remember the way home. It's like it just possesses you. The shock. You're like this, and there's nothing you can do to get rid of it. When I went to the first Gold Star mom thing, which was a month after Christopher's funeral, my first question was, when do I get my brain back? Because I'm goal-oriented. I know if you're going to be okay in 2 years, I just focus on the 2 years, and And then I asked, what's the deal with the daughter-in-laws? Because the majority of parents whose child dies, the in-laws go off and they never see their grandkids ever again. And now my daughter-in-law is wonderful, and I love her new husband. He's a Christian, and I just feel like God blessed her. He was a widower, blessed all 4 of those children with godly parents.
God gave you peace when he simply reminded you that what?
I'm under 12 inches of down. I like to have my window open in Colorado, and I sleep under down, but the window was closed. And I was shivering. I was so cold. I couldn't stop shivering, and later I learned it was the adrenaline, and I couldn't get warm, and I just heard, God numbers our days. And that was very comforting to me. And of course, God and I had a few talks about how many days he gave Christopher. But I felt like God had prepared me, because in the 90s, I worked for a religious nonprofit, and all I'll say is I had a Me Too experience. And I wasn't believed, and I was very angry with God, and I unfriended Jesus. Hey, if those guys are your friends and they are going to protect the perpetrator, So I was angry, really angry for 4 years, and then one day I thought, oh, those people don't even care about me. I'm history. And I realized it was controlling me being angry at Christians who lacked integrity. And then one day I just said, that's it, I'm done. And then I was mad at myself that I spent wasted 4 years not pursuing what God wanted for my life. But also that night, I grew up in the ministry, my husband was a minister, and whenever something really tragic happened in my life, like my miscarriage and other things, I just turned around and ministered to others. But that night, I told God, I said, I am going to lean into the grief, and I'm not going to turn around, and I'm not going to minister. I will not rattle one doorknob. But I said, I'll walk through the door, any door you open. But I didn't recognize it when it opened. It was military related, and it was outside my Christian bubble of what I thought, what God would want me to do. But God opened up a door for me to share my faith with Rangers and with the military, and because of who Christopher was, I guess my son was really famous. He's the most deployed soldier in American history to be killed in action. And because of who Christopher was, it just opened the door, and nobody was offended about my faith that was flaming. They were all very respectful.
So you've had number of opportunities to share Jesus in all kinds of settings because of this, and really even the difficulties that you experienced back in the 1990s really prepared you and gave you a solid foundation.
Actually, what I realized was my Me Too experience was so soul-crushing and devastating. So I told Phil, and sometimes I'm not comfortable telling Christians this, I didn't lose my faith in God, but I did lose my faith in Christ. But actually, deep down, I knew his shoulders were big enough to take my rage. and I could take my rage and let him tell him everything I thought, about how I was feeling. And actually, it was so I study from the Jewish perspective. I was in precept, and after studying all these books, I realized you can't understand the New Testament if you don't know the Old Testament. And this was before kind of the study the Bible from the Jewish point of view rage. And so I did study with a rabbi and who taught New Testament at a Catholic college. And like Rabbi said, where there's two Jews, there's three opinions. So he wasn't offended if I brought up, like the first time I went, he said, okay, why are you here? And I said, well, I'm a Christian, and I want to study the Old Testament, or the Tanakh, from the Jewish perspective, because I knew it would give me a deeper understanding of the New Testament. And he just said, welcome, we're glad you're here. I can tell you're a woman of faith.
So I'm interested for you to share briefly about, I saw this, you shared this on your social media not long ago, and we talked about it yesterday. You wanted to know something about this guy that made the bomb that killed your son.
So I thought they'd captured him. And honestly, I desperately wanted to go to Afghanistan and share Jesus with him in prison. But of course, I knew the generals wouldn't agree to that. But I thought, what kind of religion teaches you to blow up your neighbor? How does that love your neighbor as yourself? But I knew that he had a family also. And about a year later, I found out he had been killed. But to be honest, it made me feel ill inside. It didn't like, oh, yay, get him. But he has a family, too, that was grieving the loss. And really, it's the widows and the orphans are the ones that suffer, no matter if it's the enemy or us.
I appreciate, Scotty, so much. You have a heart for people and a heart that they might know Jesus. So let's wrap this up. Tell us, just in a brief thought, how would Christopher want us to remember him this Memorial Day?
I really believe, so Christopher was a humble, what they call the humble professional. When he went out, he would not wear his ranger gear, and he'd die if he knew I had an Army Ranger license plate thing on my car. And so I have kind of a weird sense of humor. So the first Memorial Day, they flew us to Fort Bragg, and I saw that license plate. And I told my Army Ranger escort, I said, oh, I'm buying this. I bought two for the front and the back of the car. And I said, oh, Christopher would be so disgusted. And he looked at me and he says, yeah, right. And I said, it's okay, he's dead. So, rein me back in. What was the question?
So give us one way that we should remember Christopher.
I really think that he would want to be remembered as a faithful husband, a devoted husband, and a great dad. And when your kids have kids, you don't know what kind of parent they're going to be. He was amazing. He was just amazing, and that just made me really happy. And he wasn't going to propose to Sarah because he knew if he's killed, he didn't want it to hurt her. But finally he did, and I'm glad he did. And he says, oh, Mom, she's like you. She's strong like you. And she was. But that's what I think he'd want to be remembered as a faithful, loving husband and a devoted father.
Amen. Scotty, thank you so much. Church, let her know how much you love her. God bless you, Scotty. God bless you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks for bringing me in.
God bless you. Thank you, church. You may be seated. And again, I feel like it is a very important duty that I have every year to put a face and a name with Memorial Day, and that's exactly what we've done today. To remember that national freedom is not free. But as followers of Jesus Christ, here's something else we need to know. Spiritual freedom is not free. We cannot take it for granted that we have the spiritual freedom we have without recognizing and remembering that Jesus Christ died in blood and agony that we might be free. Isn't that true? I want you to think about this now. Spiritual freedom is not free. Every single one of us, before we came to Jesus Christ, was a slave to sin. Think about that, slavery to our sin. You know, Jesus, among other things, did not beat around the bush. Isn't that true? I mean, Jesus just kind of got right to the point in so many ways. John chapter 8, verse 34, Jesus said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin." And I will tell you, there is nothing that you could do, nothing that I could do to break our slavery to sin. We couldn't give enough money, we couldn't attend church enough, we couldn't listen to enough praise and worship music, any of it. We've said this in our Ephesians teaching series. We're not saved by our works. We don't come to God based on our own behavior. There's nothing that we could have done to be free from sin apart from Jesus Christ. And that's what we have. We have liberty through the Son. Yes, there's slavery to sin, but there's liberty through the Son. Why did Jesus come? Why did Jesus Christ come to this earth? I'll tell you, I'll share a verse from the Bible with you. And speaking of Army Rangers, I used to share this one with Rangers all the time, because you start talking about destroying things, you get a Ranger's attention. 1 John 3:8, listen to this. When people keep on sinning, it shows that they belong to the devil, who has been sinning since the beginning. But the Son of God came to destroy the works of the devil. That's exactly why Jesus came, to destroy and break those chains that enslaved us to our sin. And think about this, the byproduct, the fruit of that destruction and that victory. Galatians 5:1, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Now, how did Jesus pull that off? How did Jesus pull off that incredible victory? Well, it's through the cross. Isn't that right? Through the cross and his death on the cross. Read the Gospels. Jesus Christ was beaten and whipped and mocked by his tormentors. Jesus Christ had a sharp crown of thorns pressed down on his head. Jesus Christ carried this heavy, burdensome wooden cross on his back up the mountain. And Jesus Christ had iron spikes driven through his hands and his feet. And ultimately, he breathed his last on what we call the old rugged cross, dying that we might have freedom, that we might have life. Spiritual freedom is not free. May I remind you, Colossians chapter 1, verse 20, God was pleased through Jesus to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. And of course, we did a whole message on Ephesians 1:7 just a few weeks ago. In Jesus, we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins in accordance with the riches of God's grace. You know, I told you earlier in the service that it's important to put a name and a face with Memorial Day, a tangible reminder that our freedom, our national freedom, is not free. Well, in just a few moments, we're going to participate in what we call the Lord's Supper. And the Lord's Supper was instituted by Jesus Christ and perpetuated by the apostles in the early church, listen to this, as a tangible reminder that our spiritual freedom is not free. It consists of two basic elements, bread and a cup. And for 2,000 years, Jesus-following people have participated in this simple act of the Lord's Supper, taking the bread and taking the cup, being reminded in a tangible way that spiritual freedom is not free. As important as it is to put a name and a face with Memorial Day as Americans, how much more important is it to be reminded in a physical and tangible way that our spiritual freedom is not free through the blood of Jesus Christ?
We invite you to join us in person at our campus located at 3100 East Grand Avenue in Hot Springs, Arkansas. If we can pray for you, send us an email at prayer@crossgate.org. Thanks again for listening to our audio podcast.